Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today in our house. For those of you who have never met me, my name is Malcolm. I'm Merrick's eldest grandson. And we're so happy to have everybody here in a space like this. It's very odd that the times that we bring together the most people in life are when life begins and when life ends. And despite the fact that my grandfather moved in many different circles, throughout all the different cultures he was a part of, there was a very strong significance in death. It was seen as something that was not something to necessarily be sad about, but something to be glad about the fact that we experienced a life with this person. And I think that being here in this space, seeing everybody like this here, my grandfather would be so happy. I want to extend the welcome not just to the people who are here with us physically, but also to the many other people who are watching this digitally, who couldn't be here for a multitude of different reasons. But we're so glad to have everyone here. To give some context to the event and how things will go, this is a celebration of life, and because my grandfather came from so many cultures, we hope to be able to integrate so many of them here into this ceremony. So earlier, one of my grandfather's wishes was to have certain music played, which is some of the music that you heard before we started the service itself. There will be a couple of other ceremonies that take place throughout, some religious in nature, some spiritual, and we ask that you participate in whichever way you feel most comfortable to do so. As well, we hope that this is a time that you are able to reflect as well. Later on in the ceremony, there will be time for us to go through and to have some tributes from you all if you would like to speak. Of course, time is limited, which seems to be the theme of today. So if you think about things that you'd like to say, there'll be a portion of time to do that afterwards. But with that, I'd like to get started and start going through the ceremony itself. One of the first things that we'll do is something called a libation ceremony. This is done in many African cultures throughout the world and has a very strong resonance, not just with my grandfather, but also with many of us here as a Pan-African group and a group of quite a different cultural makeup. It felt appropriate to do a libation here. So I'll walk us through the libation ceremony as we go. Libation is giving honor, reverence, respect, and recognition to our ancestors, whose shoulders we stand on, and our elders whose shadows we walk in. We pour libation to honor the past so we may learn from it. We use water because water has no enemies. We use water to freshen the road our ancestors traveled to be here with us today. We use water as a symbol of the continuity of life, to purify and to nourish our souls. At the end, as I go through some of these prompts, we'll ask you to all say as a group, Ashe. This means so be it. And so we ask that, as I say, let us say Ashe. Please follow in turn. We pour libation to Mother Africa, the birthplace of all humanity. Let us say Ashe. We pour libation to the great civilizations of Africa. Let us say Ashe. Ashe. We pour libation to our elders, whose wisdom we seek in all endeavors. Let us say Ashe. Ashe. We pour libation to our mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers, our fathers, grandfathers, and our great-grandfathers, uncles, aunts, and cousins, the foundation of our families, immortalized in our thoughts. Let us say Ashe. Ashe. An African proverb tells us that people who lack the knowledge of their past are like a tree without roots. So in the spirit of remembrance, we pour this libation. Let us say, Ashe. We pour libations for Merrick, father, archaeologist, academic, and friend in the highest regard. Let us say, Ashe. We pour to the legacy Merrick leaves behind in his children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. Let us say, Ashe. We pour to the wisdom he gave to this world, the knowledge he instilled onto others, and the love he shared for all those in attendance today. Let us say, Ashe. We pour libation to our family members who have passed over and could not be here today. We ask that they be with us in our thoughts. Let us say, Ashe. And we pour libation to those yet unborn, our future leaders, our future heroes and heroines, that will continue the struggle to be a free, proud, and protected people. Those who will not let our legacy and our efforts for progress die. Let us say, Ashe. Thank you all for taking part in that. The libation is important for many different reasons, but it emphasizes not just the reason why we're all here, the passing, but also in remembrance of the fact that these libations are poured for our ancestors and for those who are yet to be a part of our system and our society. We're built upon the legacy of so many different people. My grandfather was built upon the legacy of his fathers, grandfathers, and the wisdom of his people moving forward. In times especially like these, I find that it's important for us to always remember the fact that our histories are important. And it's important that we remember history so that the wrongs of the past, the wrongs that impacted so many people, my grandfather included, are not repeated. And so thank you for taking a part in this libation ceremony and as we move forward in the rest of the service from here. We'd like to begin first with a life tribute. We'll go through from a group of different people. The first to speak is going to be Andy Apter from the UCLA Department of History.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Malcolm, for those beautiful words, really. I didn't expect to be so prominent in this event in the sense of being the first outsider, non-family member to speak, and I'm honored by, the occasion. So, what I want to do is just put Merrick's, my relationship to Merrick in somewhat of a personal context, and I want to read two quotes from him that characterize some of the qualities I think we all admire and have loved him for. I came late to UCLA in terms of his trajectory. My partner, Robin Derby, and I came when she got a job in the history department, and anthropology looked at me coming from Chicago and shut the door with a loud slam. So history loved her so much, they hired me, and so there I was, an anthropologist among the historians. And that's partly why Merrick and I got along so well, because he was too. And we kind of have a number of affinities. We're both Africanists, we're both Atlanticists, we're both anthropologists. I actually work on Yoruba, so when you say Ashe, it's a serious command. It influences the future. And we both experience what it's like to be a Jew in British academia. It's a very particular kind of exclusion, very polite. But when it comes to sitting at high table, all sorts of little microaggressions start popping out, and you're never truly a member of the guild in Oxbridge if you're Jewish, and there's always a little tiny mark of Cain on you or something. We're both Cambridge University alums. We both love motorcycles. When he discovered that I rode a Triumph, he proudly showed me a picture of his Velocette, which is more like a mobilette. It's more like that he drove around in the 50s in England. And we both directed the UCLA's African Studies Center at different times. And in 2009, my friend and colleague and his former student, Pat Polk, who was working as a curator at the Fowler Museum, we organized a conference in his honor called Excavating the Past, Critical Approaches to Black Atlantic Regional Networks. And it was a fabulous event with a lot of his former students producing really good work. So I've been told I have to speak no longer than 10 minutes, which is academically impossible for those of us who get paid to do this. So I'll try to speed up. I want to now argue for his promotion. I'm going to go into administrative mode for a minute. Merrick, I think, qualifies very well for being promoted super above scale. He's now ready to enter the distinguished category status of an ancestor, and we just want to make sure he does that, so I'm going to make the case for him. Obviously, his scholarship is interdisciplinary at the core, which is something that has only became sort of a priority well after he launched his career. His extraordinary service is manifest in so many of the museums and programs and field schools he set up. We both have interdepartmental appointments. He had them in anthropology, the Coatzin Institute, and history. But in particular, I want to draw attention to his excellence in the sort of the box called diversity, equity, and inclusion, a category that only appeared in UCLA promotion cases about a decade ago, and they're still doing it wrong, as you can probably imagine. But at least the intent is good. But so Merrick's commitment to training Africans, not other Europeans in Africa, distinguished him from his peers when he first went to Uganda in the late 50s, and he would incorporate them into programs that he helped develop and launch, and then he would integrate them into the running of those programs. His focus academically was away from the sort of states and kingdoms that archaeologists favor to hinterlands and marginal neglected zones. He had intellectual diversity. I think as a kind of post-colonial and colonial critic, he definitely preempted or preceded the subaltern studies and post-colonial studies with a modesty that is just simply almost never found among academics. So I recommend him for promotion. And I wanted to read two passages from an interesting interview the laptop, thanks. And I know my time's probably getting close, okay. So these passages come from an interview that took place, I think the interview is itself 2009 or 10, in the Journal of Africanist Archaeology. And let me just get in my screen here. And it's a sort of précis of it's a smaller version of the memoir he wrote that came out in 2009. So the question is, can you share with me what Kenya was like for you? And listen to his observations. Kenya was a remarkable world. There were 60,000 whites who controlled everything in a country of 8 million. Africans were servants. I was in Kenya from 1956 to 58. I was 25 when I arrived. My plane stopped in Rome, Cairo, Khartoum, Entebbe, and then Nairobi. I was met by Louis Leakey and taken to the Norfolk Hotel. And everybody, when they came in, put their revolvers on the table. Remember what settler colonialism was like not long ago. I was told that if I was to go down to Organ Sali, then I would have to go to the district officer to get a permit, a kapande as it was called, to take 4 people with me. Leakey offered me a gun and I said I didn't really know how to shoot. I decided I didn't want a gun. I felt safe without it. The reality was only 32 civilians had been killed by Kikuyu from 1952 to 53. From 53 to 56, there had been no civilian deaths. The whole thing about the barbarism of Mau Mau, the Mau Mau Rebellion, has been overfetched. It was the Kikuyu who were being killed. And just the modesty of how he says that is just beautiful. It says so much about he didn't have to shriek, he didn't have to overstate, he just laid it out. And you can tell that he was not a member of the club and didn't want to be. That was a pretty ugly club. Now I want to look at one of the best moments of his life. Let's see. And this is on the occasion, reflecting on the occasion of his installation as a chief. Oh dear. I don't remember the chieftaincy title offhand, but I do. Yeah, Ahohini in the town of Hani, where he set up a museum. When the time came, it was Easter. My wife and children came. The ceremonies went on from morning to evening. In the evening, people came to greet me and congratulate me. We were seated under umbrellas. We were arranged there, and the chief and his followers came. The chief was carried in his palanquin. It was a state occasion. There was singing and dancing. Palm wine was drunk. After the end of the speeches and ceremonies, I was hoisted on people's shoulders and carried back to where I lived. People sprinkled white powder on me and ash. It was like a different day for me. A different day for me. What a way of putting it. It was different from any day I had ever or ever will have. They produced a stool for me and they produced sandals and said this is how I should remember the village. Then about a year later, when I was going back to California, I said I thought I should now give up my chieftaincy. And they said, oh no, you can't give it up unless you bring scandal or die. I've been back to the village several times. I am honored. People don't try to get favors from me. I don't believe that. But anyway, that's what a chief does, right? They want to know what they can give to me rather than the other way around. By the way, for those of you who might be a little worried, I'm not appropriating kente cloth. I am actually authorized to wear this, but I'm wearing it today in honor of this chieftaincy of Merrick's. I felt that the ancestors of the people of the village were my ancestors, and I somehow believed much more thoroughly in their concept of time. This was a circular idea, that one lived, one died, one became an ancestor. One drew from the strength of the ancestors. This was very appealing to me. This was a small village. I knew all the people. It was for the first time in my life, and the only time in my life, that I have been in a community where I could walk around to every house and know somebody by name and feel that they accepted me, and I accepted them. They called me Prof as a term of respect as much as anything. And that sense of finding a place where he was more comfortable than any other place in his life speaks to the kinds of exclusions he had experienced as a non-elite British immigrant from East Europe, academic. I came from outside, and Ahoho means stranger, but it isn't really our concept of strangers as alien. In that Ghanaian village, my deputy, Ahoheni, came from a village several miles away, but he was still Ahoho because he wasn't born in that village. We both felt that we belonged in many ways. There was a trust between myself and the various people. If somebody in the village had a problem and they weren't of the village, they would come to me to explain the problem, and I would go to the Okemi, the linguist, to speak to the chief. That would be the Ohene. This is the way information was relayed and counsel given. I still feel that the Ghanaian village was the most democratic society I ever lived in. One of the features of the village was that there were 3 principal clans. At different festivals, different clans came to prominence. The Queen Mother spoke on behalf of the women of the village. There was a respect for learning and ability, and that I liked. It was a meritocracy. And I just want to say, let's see. He goes on to say that it was the most meaningful experience that he'd ever had in his life, the installation. Now, he's had a lot of experiences in his life, and that's what distinguishes him from the white mischief of the white settlers who then became, who either left the country or lingered on. The community that closed its doors to Africans and looked down on them, that's anti-Merrick, and Merrick was anti that. So I want to end just by greeting Merrick's spirit. So, Ekuagbao, greetings for being an elder. Ori Pegan. So now let us say Ashe. Ashe.
I was going to.
Oh, wow. I did not.
Perfect. I think that one is mine. This one here.
Oh, so sorry.
From one academic to another, I understand taking the materials away after you've spoken at the podium. I did want to bring significance to the table that's here. For those of you who may not be able to see it, or to those who are on our live stream, there is a table here that has significance to many of the different parts of who he was. The seat that you see here on top of the table was given to him when he received that honorary title. It is something that is very sacred to him and very sacred to the people. As well, the table is also adorned with some of the fruits and flowers from his garden. He took a lot of pride in his garden. Those of you who ever visited his house at Rubio, or those of you who may have lived at Rubio, likely knew the fact that he took quite a lot of pride in his garden. And so it felt fitting to have it here. As well, his pith helmet is here, and of course his remains are here on the table as well. So, at some point, after the service is done, of course, feel free to come by the table, pay your respects if you would like. Let's move on. I would like to now turn it over to Abednego. I've said it correct. Tony Adedze. I've heard your name before, and it's when it's written down, it becomes a whole other thing. A doctoral student and friend of my grandfather.
I think Prof will love this because he has a lot of friends here and people who just heard about him and decided to come. One of the things I like to say is that I'm here not only for myself, because he's done so much for me, but a lot of my colleagues, my friends, and also some of the students and staff of Prof who are no longer with us. So I'm here to speak on behalf of what? The living and those who are gone. In fact, this is the first time I've come to Los Angeles, and I said I'll be strong, but it's okay. This is the first time I arrived in Los Angeles, and I didn't call Prof to say I've arrived. So it was kind of strange for me. But anyway, I mean, he's become an ancestor, and I can tell you that, and I can assure you that he was welcomed by what? A great group of ancestors. The welcoming party will be even bigger than this one. I'm thinking of people like Mr. Dankwa, Kofi Agosa, Dovi Kovi. Doran just, when you call ancestors' name, they try to tell you that you don't forget my name. Yeah. If you've seen Libation in Africa, you remember Doran Ross, Russell Shue, Obichere, and many, many others. They have given him a welcome party. And why do they honor him? And we should be proud of this because the ancestors not only protect, they also guide. So while they are gone, he's in a far better place, in a higher position, where he can help us. So we might be mourning, but we also celebrate, and we are happy that he's going to do a lot more for us than he did when he was alive. At least that's how I was brought up, and that's how he brought me up too. So, Prof, as we all call him, James Sankwanda, did I mention him? No. Yeah. So, he just let me know. Anyway, so, Prof, we are very proud of his multi-dimensional research. He believed in diversity. But one of the things that I remember going out doing research with him is that wherever he went, it wasn't just about getting knowledge, publishing, and moving on. He establishes a very good relationship with the people. Yes, for example, Togbi Agokoli, the former chief of Ngoche, who's gone and passed. And because Prof is royalty, wherever we went to, he had to bring the schnapp, the gin. He'll send you in the night and say, well, we didn't buy the gin, so go and get it. Go and get the schnapp. So you have to go and get this. And when we go to visit the chief, before you start any research, you have to pray to the ancestors so that they bless the research. And it doesn't end there. He establishes this link with the people. That continued forever. He just didn't do the research and left the community. They still asked of him. He's still in touch with them. He was always in touch with them and asked about their children's education, progress in the community, whether they needed a borehole, whether they needed a school, and who want to further his education. That's who Prof is. I'll say is because he's going to do a better job, so you understand me, even than before. And one of the things he liked to do is also to maintain this relationship is that he took a lot of photographs. Most of these were in slides, but he would print them and return to the people. And they were happy. And about 3 years ago, I was in Noche, and he knew I was going, so he printed some more pictures for me to take there. So we did some market research there. And while I was showing the pictures to the people in the market, one person jumped and said, "That was my father." He said his father didn't leave any photographs at all. So Merrick's photograph became the only memory that he had of his father who passed on. So I gave it to him with pride, and I promised that I will enlarge it and give to him. This is the sort of person Prof was. Or is. So they remember him, and he still remembered them all along. And then the other important aspect of Prof is that he's one of those Africanist scholars who took so much interest in the education of his colleagues, Africans. He always wanted them to have access to all the knowledge, the technology, analysis, conservation, museum work, field work, everything. And he sent many of them to Europe and also the United States, more than any other Africanist that I know. And he stays in contact with them throughout. So when we talk about people, he remembers all of these people that some of them I have forgotten. This is the sort of person he is. He supported Africa, not only culturally or in his scientific research, but in his everyday life. And something that we all hope to what? Emulate. Okay, now that I've talked in general, maybe I want to talk a little bit of what he has done for me personally. Without him, I would not be here. And just to digress a little bit, if you're one of those people who has applied for a US visa before, you know what it means. It's not easy. But I can tell you that I was not even interviewed when I got my visa because Prof was behind me. My I-20 form, the student's form that you need to get your visa, was sent by DHL to the US Embassy. And they called me to bring my passport. So I gave them the passport. They asked me to sit. I didn't fill any form. They didn't ask me any question. And I was given a visa to come to the United States. That's what Professor Posnansky is. And guess what? I arrived on KLM flight at LAX. In those days, they didn't have regular hours, so the flight arrived at 4 a.m. And guess who was waiting for me at the airport? Yes. And did I go to the dorm? No. He took me to his house in Northridge at the time. Yeah. And I stayed there for several weeks until I was embarrassed. I said he couldn't be driving me to UCLA and back every day. He didn't mind. He did it. So I decided to move to the dorm. And guess what? My first day at UCLA, I went to the graduate division. Everybody heard of me. African Studies, everybody heard of me. Institute of Archaeology, everybody heard of me. The museum, but then it wasn't Fowler Museum. It was what? Museum of Cultural History. Everybody heard of me. So somehow I became very popular without doing anything. And then what? On the 9th floor of Bunch Hall, Prof had his office, right? He gave me a key. I mean, who else had an office on the 9th floor as a graduate student? Nobody. And he wasn't there most of the time. He had his lab, and then later he became director of African Studies. So I had the office all to myself. In fact, the only person that wasn't too happy that I had the office was the janitor. Because he used to sleep there. He probably mentioned Joe to you. Yeah, okay. Well, he had this couch there that Joe was sleeping in every night. So Joe didn't like it when I stayed late, but we became friends later, and he explained to me why he didn't like me the first time. But something of importance too is that Prof became my father. When I left Africa to the US, I thought, I have left my father. You know, African fathers can be really tough. And they want you to do things in a certain way. So I was happy to be leaving and then coming to Los Angeles. Well, from day one, he made it clear that he's now responsible for me. And sometimes, you see, in my family, we are very big. I have several brothers and sisters. We never count how many, but here I was. Prof had time for me. So that means even the little freedom I had of my biological father, he took it away. I mean, everything. I wanted to buy a car. He said, no, you don't need a car. Save money. you want to do this? He said, no. Yes, go this way, that direction. So eventually I accepted. I even suspected that he and my biological father communicated, and then he just said, do everything. But that's my relation with him. He has become my father. So here, I've really lost a father. But I have to be a strong African and believe that he's even going to do better for me than ever. And it wasn't easy for me telling a lot of people that he's no longer there, because he's an extraordinary human being. I mean, so also was his dear wife Eunice. I mean, they took me like their son. And thank you for sharing your dad with me. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to him more than my own biological father, and I have his phone messages saved over the years. He likes to write too. Even though we talk on the phone, he will still write to me. And we also happen to have one passion, which I didn't know he had. As I say, he's multidimensional. He collected stamps, and I also collected stamps. So the only time I knew that he was collecting his stamps was one day we were clearing up his garage, and I lifted this box, big box, which was so light. I was like, what's in this box? He said, open it. And I saw so many African stamps. And I said, okay, next time I have to show him my collection. And just because we get along so well and discuss so many things that we agree with, his tastes for the stamps were not different from mine. We collected similar stamps all of these years. And sometimes he'll go to stamp shows and then buy stamps for me and then send to me. So all of this I'll never forget. And even for my own children, over the years, who visit him in Los Angeles, he was so excited to see them. And he would sit and talk and tell them all these stories about what it is. So he continued, and I know he will continue. He will never stop. Just as he continues with his grandchildren. He's just the kind of person he is. And anyway, thank you all for coming. And I know he will appreciate all of you. And those of you who know him closely will know that I've not said everything. There's still a lot to be said by you all. So, being a royal of Hani, I'll say Daye. And in my language, we'll say Hedenye, or have a safe trip. And rest in peace, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, I would like to invite Naomi to come up. Naomi, Merrick's niece.
I don't usually need that. To my embarrassment, I don't need it. Mine is just a vignette about my uncle, but it is so typical of him. In 2015, my son Matthew and daughter-in-law Eleanor Schiffman decided to get married. And they chose as the venue the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere, which happens to be on Curacao. Unsurprisingly, that's quite a distance, so very few family could join us. but Merrick did. And I still remember, with Matthew, driving over the bridge to the airport and seeing my uncle being wheeled out of a plane. He had traveled 3,600 miles. He was 84 years old, but he was at that wedding. Now, over the next few days, unfortunately, he had a problem with his diabetes and spent a couple of days in hospital. Throughout the whole thing, he was totally cheerful. He loved the ward. He loved people being there. He loved the birds flying through the ward. He was fine with all of it. And by God, he made it to the wedding. He was at the ceremony, and he was at the dinner. Towards the end of the dinner, he stood up to give a speech. He identified himself as the elder statesman because he realized that he was the eldest living member of the family. And he gave a wonderful talk about tradition and about passing the baton from one person to another. It was absolutely wonderful. There was not a dry eye in the house. And that was my uncle. He will be missed.
Very much. Thank you.
We live in a digital age, which means that my notes are, in some cases, on my phone. I swear I'm not texting. I'd like to invite up, if they are comfortable doing so, Kofi and Maya to come up as well. Kofi, would you like to speak first?
Sure. Also part of the digital age. I want to say a little bit about memory because there's something about the present that is very fragile, and without memory, each moment can kind of release into the last. And I think sometimes memories have a very vivid sense, and you feel like revisiting a memory is living that again. Sometimes a memory is very faint, and it's a very faint trace, but either way, it sows the residue of each little moment into a great tapestry of a past and our past. So I think thank you all for coming here. We all have Merrick in our tapestry in different ways to different sizes, but he's there for all of us. And I don't have a very detailed vignette to share, but when I think about my grandpa, I think about just an endless, uncountable series of these little moments of, of picking apples like that in his garden, of the feeling of his cardigan as he gave the most gentle hug you've ever felt. I remember his very adventurous, far-off stories of far-off lands and his childhood, which still baffles me to this day. And I remember going to his house on Sundays, and he'd pour me a little bit of tea and a lot of milk. And I remember that tea growing darker and darker as I got older, and I remember him growing older. I remember when his little wooden walking stick became a larger walking stick, and then a walker and a wheelchair. But in each little transformation, each little moment, there was always him, and there was always this unifying presence and gentleness and grace and wisdom and wit. He was a very, very funny man. And I just feel so lucky that I got to live with him and got to experience and, be his grandson. And I think also with memory, the fact that he was an archaeologist and a historian sort of speaks to the fact that a lot of his life was spent studying and serving the cultural memory of Africans, a lot of African peoples. And for a Brit coming over, it'd be very easy to do a kind of like treasure hunting with these items, but he didn't. And there was a real sense of respect and a genuine level, horizontal kind of relation with us Africans. And the fact that we are Ugandans with the last name as old country as Posnansky, I think kind of speaks to how much he would reach across difference and how much connection and love he had. I think moments like this, moments where we remember someone as great as him, kind of make memory into an ethical imperative. It makes it something that is a practice. We practice memory every day, and it's a choice. It's, you know, he has become an ancestor, so to speak, and we will become ancestors at a certain time. And I think as long as we keep weaving him into our little tapestry, and in the moments where it feels like he's truly gone, we can kind of take comfort in this tapestry, and we can, you know, feel it like the warmth of his hug. And I think just keeping in mind him and letting him kind of live in every little moment. And when you look at a beautiful garden, a beautiful, you know, treated garden, you can think of him. And when you sip tea, you can think of him. And I think as long as we remember to live and love as freely as he did and as freely as he gave it out to everyone, I think we'll be all right. So let's just, you know, let's remember him. Let's make that a practice.
One of the last things Grandpa said to Maya is, "Don't forget me." And she assured him that no one possibly could. From his crazy jokes to his very sweet moments, we all have something we cherish with him. So whatever it is, give him a sign that you haven't forgotten him. Now here come my academic papers. Many of you knew my grandfather as a professor, an Africanist, or an archaeologist. But there's one thing I always knew him as: old. He was the type of old man that you would read about in stories like Mr. Magoo or Carl Fredricksen in Pixar's Up. He loved reading the newspaper, wore tweed at all occasions, and couldn't change a clock forward during daylight savings time, despite having a degree from Cambridge. But that's part of what made him so special. I've been called an old soul, and so being around my grandpa, I felt a special sense of belonging. I picked up many of my passions and interests from him, such as a love for public radio, a passion for documentaries, and of course, my taste in hats. His vast collection of National Geographic magazines is one of the main reasons why I became a marine scientist in the first place. I could tell you all many stories to summarize who my grandpa was as a person. But I think the best way is to talk about how we spent most of our time together in the later years of his life. Whenever I would come back into town, my grandpa and I would go to the Robin Hood, a British pub in the valley, for a meal and some shopping. These visits were so routine and unchanging, archaeologists years from now will use them as a way for measuring time. Each visit, we would drive along Burbank Boulevard, and my grandpa would mention how many new apartments there were and how few they were when he first moved here. We would find a table in the back room and grab a copy of the British newspaper. He would order a cider and one piece of the fish and chips, while I would get two. After our meal, we would go next door to the shop where he'd buy his English goods. And lastly, he would buy me a bag of fruit pastilles. While all of this may sound like not much to you, it meant the world to me. In a world where so many things have felt out of balance, spending time with my grandfather made me feel at peace. It was time for the two of us to talk about everything from science and research to life and what it means to enjoy what you do. Despite the sounds of the bar around us, he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. It's part of the magic of who he was. He always knew how to make me feel like I meant something, and that despite sometimes not feeling like it, I was doing a good job. Thank you. There's a children's book where a mole says the following: "Sometimes I want to say I love you all, but I find it difficult. So I say something like, I'm glad we're all here. In many ways, my grandfather was like this mole. Whether it was because he was an academic or that he grew up in a different time, I never heard him say the phrase, I love you, much. But I came to find that he would use other words to mean the same thing. Between he and I, this phrase was, I had a very good time with you today. It was how he ended each of my visits with him. In that one phrase, he conveyed how much he cared about me, how proud he was of me, and how much love he had for me. It's hard to use the past tense when speaking about my grandpa. In a way, I have been both preparing for a time without him, while doubting that such a time would ever come. Though he's no longer here physically, there are times where I feel him in the world. His words are in the sounds of pages turning in a National Geographic magazine. His smile is in the warmth of the Southern California sun. And his love is in the countless memories we have all shared with him over the years. In the same way he tended to his flowers and fruit trees, he tended to all of us, growing us to find our place in the garden of life. His wisdom lives on in all of us, and I hope that you share that with the people you love. That's how he would have wanted it. I want to close by leaving you with a quote from The Little Prince, a story that always reminds me of my grandpa. I get the waterworks from my dad, I swear. Before he goes, the little prince says the following. In one of these stars I shall be living. In one of them I shall be laughing. And so it will be as if all the stars were laughing when you look up at the sky. And your friends will be properly astonished to see you laughing as you look up at the sky. Then you will say to them, yes, the stars always make me laugh. And they will think you are crazy. It will be a shabby trick that I have played on you all. Which is a very grandpa thing to say. And when your sorrow is comforted, and time soothes all sorrows, you'll be content that you have known me. You will always be my friend. I shall not leave you. Grandpa, you will always be my friend. You shall not leave me. Thank you. The strong African gene must have skipped a generation, I swear. I'd like to bring up my father, Jonathan Tennell. Just a moment. You wrote this program. I'd like to bring up my father, Jonathan Tennell, his son-in-law, to speak.
Of course, I'm already crying. Merrick and I had a great and interesting relationship. He raised a family of all girls, and he came from a family of mostly girls. So I was a bright, shining light. We got to spend a lot of time together, just he and I, because I was his tech support. He was a brilliant man, but hand him anything mechanical and he was lost. When I first encountered Merrick was on a date that Sheba and I were going on, and she was taking me to meet their parents, and she was late, and I was on time, and so were her parents. So I met them on my own. And they started to interrogate me, where'd I go to school, all that kind of stuff. And I'm a high school dropout. So it was a very interesting conversation. But we worked on it. And I was always a little worried at first that he wasn't going to like me. And, you know, I wanted to stay in his good graces as much as I could. And we had a 30th birthday party. It was shortly after Sheba and I got together. And my neighbor was unhappy with this party. And it was in the middle of the day like this. And we had a band, a loud band, and it was a good time. Everybody's having a great time. And my neighbor complained and called the police. I walked out to see what was going on, and my neighbor said, I want to put him under citizen's arrest. And the police officer puts me in handcuffs. And right at that moment, Merrick and Eunice were leaving the party. Merrick comes up immediately. What are you doing to him? And the officer goes, sir, just back up. This does not concern you. He goes, it does concern him. It does concern me. This is my daughter's boyfriend. And he concerns me. Well, the police officer then puts me in the police car. And I'm in the police car, the window's down, and Merrick starts to ramp up. Now, he's a very subdued kind of guy. Everybody knows this, right? He immediately gets into, I know why you're doing this, because he's black. He's a black man in America. And he goes, and he goes. And the next thing I hear the officer say is, sir, I'm about to arrest you too. And right at that moment, right as that moment was happening, and he says, well, lock me up too. Right that moment, Sheba and fortunately Eunice come back out and slowly de-escalate the situation. And from that moment on, I knew me and Merrick were good. And I never forgot that. And it always stuck with me. And I always said, whatever he needs, I got it. And I made sure to the end, if he needed something from me, he got it. He used to love to come here and have tea and take a bath. You know, and at the end I had to help him in and out of the bathtub. And he never could thank me enough for it. And I would always tell him, I know you would do the same for me if I was in your situation. And I knew he would. And that's my little antidote. But what I do want to also say is, when I think of him, I think of the words dedication. Because he was dedicated to Africa, as a continent and the people as a people. And he was dedicated to his family. He always wanted to be involved. And Finn, Britta, Helen, he would come up and see you as often as he could. And he wanted to come more, but he couldn't. He loved you to the end. And the same for Malcolm, and Maya, and Kofi, Sheba, and Tessa. He taught you that dedication because you took care of him till the end. You were there daily, weekly, whenever he needed you. You were there. Another little just quick story was he moved into Belmont Villages where he went to his retirement. And I helped move his furniture in, and then I was gone. Just a one quick day thing. And thank you. And it was probably another week to 2 weeks before I went back. But I walk into the place, and they're like, "Oh, hi, you're Merrick's son-in-law." I'm like, "What?" And someone else goes, "Oh, yeah, Merrick's right over there." And I had never seen any of these people before in my life. But already, these two had gone in and gotten to know everybody to make sure their dad could get whatever he needed, whenever he needed, and was taken care of. They would take turns and take shifts towards the end to make sure that somebody was always around. The kids would take shifts. Terrence, wherever you are, over here, would take a shift. And that was dedication. When Tony tells you about what Merrick did for him, that was dedication. He was dedicated to whatever he put in his mind, in his life. He did it thoroughly, he did it fully, he did it selflessly. And that's the man I remember. And the last thing I'll say is I want to explain that song at the end, Across the Bridge. The last song we played, a couple of people laughed like, why this country song? That song is from one of the last digs he went on. Was mainly Africans. And I don't remember exactly where because I don't have the paper in front of me. But they would play that song every day, almost every morning, when they would start their day out. And he's not a big fan of music in general, but not a big fan of country music. But he said every time he would hear that song, it just touched him in some way. And he just felt like that song said how he felt about dying. And this was a conversation he and I had like 12 years ago or even longer. He gave me this list of songs that he wanted for this moment, and those last 4 songs that you heard were those songs. So that's where it comes from. So I guess he's across the bridge listening to his country music. So thank you for coming. There's still more to go on, and there's more people to speak, but I just want you to know we appreciate you all coming because you're all here, because you were loved and you're giving us that energy, and we love you for it. Thanks. Yes. Oh, you get one.
Thank you. Not too old for hugs. All right. I'd like to now bring up Are you both coming up together? Are you going? Okay. Sheba and Tessa, Merrick's daughters.
Sorry.
I know that part, don't worry.
I bring the quiet, calm Uganda. I'm 62 and a half, which means that I have 62 years with my dad. So many memories, so many things that I could talk about. But instead, I had to write something more about the character of who he was. Okay, so identity is where I'd like to start. Identity, the set of qualities, beliefs, personality traits, appearance, and or expressions that characterize a person or a group. Aspects of your life that you have no control over, such as where you grew up and the color of your skin. Our dad, Merrick Posnansky, was a man of resilience and community. Throughout his life, he built connections with like-minded individuals, celebrating the diversity and backgrounds that surrounded him. In Africa, he embraced his identity as a British, tea-drinking, cricket-loving, stamp enthusiast, professor, family man, and mentor. In that space, his ethnicity didn't overshadow who he was. He was free to be himself and wore the mantle of expatriate with pride. Dad was pragmatic, always believing that within every challenge there was a silver lining. But he understood that to see the silver lining, you often had to weather the dark skies first. He had a genuine affection for people and believed wholeheartedly that everyone had something to offer and deserved a second chance. I marveled at how he was able to forgive when he traveled to Bolimov, the village where his paternal family had lived and suffered during the Holocaust. None of them survived. He was willing to engage with neighbors who I believe may have had a hand in that suffering. For me, it speaks volumes about his character, his ability to seek understanding and connection, even in the face of deep historical wounds. Growing up, our home was a hub of entertainment and joy, a place where Mum and Dad loved to host gatherings. Our birthdays were monumental events filled with balloons, games, and cake, lovingly baked by Mum and decorated by Dad. Tessa and I took up the tradition, amplifying his spirit of a celebration. I fondly remember the dinner parties, and in particular Christmas Eve, where friends, especially those who were from far from home, were always welcomed to join the festivities. In true Posnansky spirit, my Super Bowl parties, Father's Day brunch, Thanksgiving celebrations continue to reflect that same inclusive joy. He and I shared a love of historical novels, including the series The #1 Ladies Detective Agency. 17 books that went back and forth between the two of us. We enjoyed books by Toni Morrison, as well as works by other international authors, many of whom, like him, were expatriates. These books sparked many wonderful conversations between us. Dad also took us on long, dusty road trips in an unair-conditioned car, sometimes reluctantly, to many archaeological sites with crumbling buildings or museums with endless halls where we were encouraged to read everything. While we may not have always been thrilled about these adventures, we found consolation in the stunning scenery and the joy of staying in a hotel with a swimming pool. He also regretted time away from us while working on archaeological sites, but that never stopped him from being our unwavering cheerleader. Family was everything to Dad. He often regretted that the time spent away from us while working up country, I think I've brought my wrong printing thing. We joined him on several occasions in Hanny and also excavated the dungeons of Cape Coast Castle, where slaves were held before their journey across the Atlantic as slaves. Being a grandfather was a role that came more easily. He loved the connection, particularly after Mum passed away. He devoted so much time to Malcolm and Maya, and later Kofi, Ivor, Britta, and Finn. Taking them on adventures, an eventful trip to Palm Springs with Malcolm and Maya. They can tell you all about that. Museum visits, the duck boats in San Francisco. How one man could take, I think 4 of you, I think Finn was still a babe, wasn't even born, 4 of you by himself with his walking stick on the duck's boats. Yeah. Yerba Vista Gardens, and then NPR Home Prairie Companion, amongst other NPR events with Malcolm, and cheering Maya on from the sidelines at her soccer games. He always made a point to be in the front row at plays and graduations, never missing Grandparents' Day except for Kofi's last one. He was very sad to miss that one. One of the most poignant moments in his later life came when he was invited to Malcolm's high school to watch a private screening of The Long Walk to Freedom, the film adaptation of Nelson Mandela's autobiography. He was honored to share his reflections of colonial Africa and apartheid. As he spoke, he broke down as he recounted an experience where he had helped a young black woman traveling with her children carrying her luggage. She was denied passage through the turnstile simply because of her color and was forced to walk all the way back. I was taken aback to see him so emotional, as I had seen him cry only a handful of times. Clearly, it struck a chord. Growing up, Dad faced exclusion and taunts from non-Jews who blamed him for the death of Christ. These experiences connected him deeply to the sting of racism and bigotry, shaping his worldview and his protective instinct, and he did everything he could to shield our multiracial family from the ugliness of racism. Dad's legacy is one of resilience, compassion, and love. He taught us the value of connection, the importance of standing up for justice, and the joy of embracing our family and friends, no matter their background. Dad may not have changed the world in any newsworthy way, but he changed our world. He showed us true strength lies in gentleness, that love is expressed not just in words, but in actions, and that a life well lived is one filled with kindness, integrity, and unwavering love for family. I will miss my dad. This house was a place of happiness for him. He watched as we built this garden and this space. He enjoyed it with so many people here. And when we first looked at UCLA Faculty Center, which he had said would be nice, I think he believed there was going to be a discount, but UCLA does not do that. And we walked around the space, and there was no life. There was no piece of Dad in that space. And I said to Tessa, I think we have it at my house. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. You're not going anywhere.
I'm standing right here.
I might need you. All right, I'm gonna have to put my specs on because look. My dad was tall, very tall, and strong. The strongest man in the world, like Superman. He had warm hands and eyes that crinkled in the corners when he smiled. He was a fast walker, very fast. We would have to run to keep up with him. These are my earliest memories of my dad. I realize that to many of you, this may be different from the Merrick that you remember, but I can assure you that this is the real Merrick. Dad was a family man. He loved his immediate family, extended family, family get-togethers, Sheba's cooking, and always made huge efforts to stay in touch with friends and family, despite often being half a world away. He would seek out distant relatives, hoping to rebuild familial connections, and in later years took great pride as a family patriarch, making sure to attend whatever weddings, bar mitzvahs, and graduations that he could. But if we thought he loved all of us, forget about it when it came to the grandchildren. He had special relationships with each of them, and you would see him light up when any of them entered the room. He beamed with pride at every graduation that he was able to attend, as much for his own longevity as for their accomplishments. I will always be thankful for the loving, nurturing relationship that he had with Kofi, and I'm relieved to see that the brainy gene skipped a generation and landed right on him. He was a lifelong learner and lover of books, a collector of stamps and coins. He was a great photographer, documenting his chart-breaking work in East and West African archaeology. Although he would never admit it, he was a very accomplished artist, as you can see from some of his drawings from his excavation sites. Learning, being interested in life, interested in people, these are some of the most important lessons that I've learned from watching him and from being his daughter. I've made it my golden rule in life and strive to instill in my son Kofi that simply by being interested and interesting, you can go very far. I thought I came up with it myself, only to discover that my dad said something very similar in an interview in 2000. I suppose I am my dad's daughter. Dad loved to travel and to lose himself in new and unknown locales. He kept a list of all the countries that he had visited with the goal of reaching 100. He may have fallen just shy of his goal, but I know he came very close. I used to love to hear about his travels, especially in some of the more remote parts of Africa. You could ask him something completely random like, "Hey Dad, I'm thinking of taking a trip. What do you think would be the best way to get to Timbuktu from Senegal?" And he would launch into a very detailed explanation that involved taxis, trains, boats, and prayers for a high tide so that said boat would show up. And he wouldn't be stuck in the middle of nowhere waiting. And then he would go off to his study to look for some number he had tucked away in a little piece of paper for someone you should call when you get there. This is still a trip I intend to make, by the way, although I'm not sure I still have the number. Whether he was traveling or just going about his everyday, he loved to meet people. He was always making friends. Sometimes he would notice something about someone's name that might be a clue as to where their family is from, and then start a conversation with them. He seemed to draw people into his orbit that were earnest, hard-working, and striving to make something of themselves. No doubt he saw something of himself in them. Dad told some tall tales. Would you believe that he broke the record for the 4-minute mile when he was in high school? No, neither did we. He also used to tell us that he could remember the day that he was born. He insisted that he remembers seeing the light hitting the curtains as he lay in his crib. Can't say we were convinced about that one either. Dad could be stubborn, or maybe we should just say feisty. But you have to figure that all that doing things your own way and pushing back on barriers is what propelled him on the grand adventure that was his life. Sheba and I would joke about how when Dad didn't want to do something, he would simply say, "Thank you, I'll think about it." Dad was a fighter. To be sure, he never got in a real fist fight, but he knew how to fight. The system, social injustice, inequality, racism. When it came to those fights, he was like a prize fighter, especially when it was on someone else's behalf. He also knew how to fight back all the ailments and ravages of old age that came at him, faster and stronger, like some out-of-control video game. Most of them we won. I'd say we must have made it to like level of 10, 9 or 10. And yes, he was strong, just like I knew it when I was little. It took a lot of strength to bounce back from each setback. It took a lot of strength to walk again after intense knee surgery at age 90. But Dad found a way. We began to take his strength for granted. Maybe he was Superman. The most defining characteristic known by anyone who knows my dad knows that he liked a nice cup of tea. And it had to be piping hot. Some of my fondest memories of our childhood are the tea times spent with my family in Ghana on the veranda. It was a time to sit, chat, reflect, and just be in each other's company. Tea in our household was a love language, and with every cup I shared with my dad over the years, it was as if we were enjoying life memories, sip by sip. On that last day, I had come to spend some time with Dad. I brought him a cappuccino, piping hot. He was weak, but enjoyed it, and found the time to scoop out the froth at the end. As I took his cup, I asked if I could get him anything else. Yes, he replied, a cup of tea. This was a good sign, I thought to myself. He must be getting better. So I made him a cuppa, nice and hot, just as he liked it. The sigh of appreciation said it all as he took the first sip. He didn't have an appetite for dinner that night, but enjoyed another cup of tea instead. The sunlight was golden and mesmerizing, so I moved his wheelchair into the light to catch the last rays. He seemed to like it, but he was tired. He wanted and needed to go back to bed. Usually we would encourage him to stay up a little bit longer, but this time I called for help to get him into bed. This time I brought a chair next to the bed, right next to him, something I'd never done before. I held his hands. They were warm. I told him I loved him. I told him you loved him, and that we all loved him. Quietly, he said, I love you. He seemed weak. I had a gardenia next to his bed and brought it to his nose. That's beautiful, he said softly. And we sat. Within 2 hours, he was gone. The moment he left, I felt intense sadness, and I felt numb. But almost immediately after that, I felt a feeling of peace. I remember saying, it's okay. It's okay. He's at peace. This is what he wanted. He was ready. I don't think those words were mine. I think they were his. I take extraordinary comfort in the knowledge that he was fully present in the world on the day that he left it. He spent time with loved ones. He felt love. He saw beauty. And he felt the rays of the sun, just like on that day that he was born. I'm eternally grateful for the support and love from Sheba as we navigated some difficult and challenging times. We were buoyed with love from our families and friends along the way. I cherish the network of doctors and angels that came into our lives to help keep Dad independent. Too many to name. The angels know who they are. That one's all right there. And we thank you. I strive to be the parent, grandparent, mentor, and friend that he was, and I'll always be proud to be Prof's daughter. I would like to end with the same words I used in closing when we celebrated my mum's life exactly 21 years ago, yesterday. Dad taught me that love of family and memories of happy times spent together is a powerful talisman that can be carried with us wherever we go. It keeps away the shadows and shows us the light. I will miss my dad terribly, but I carry his light with me now as I step into an uncertain future, bright with memories. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I actually feel, it was very hard writing anything because it doesn't feel like he's gone. And I definitely feel him here. And I know that he's not going to leave this party. So I think, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I believe almost. We wanted to give time, and I want to emphasize the tea is hot. So to emphasize his life, we want to make sure that we're brief, but we wanted to open it up. That if there were people who wanted to share any words about Merrick, about his time with all of us, the floor is here. If there is anyone. Oh, please come closer.
And to Shoma Gabriel, who are both my uncles who taught third world film, and Heine's head of film in DC, and they all are just incredible, uniquely different people. Kofi, I don't really know you, but your mother is my friend. You're so beautiful, and the love of family that this man has, and just what I learned from him. I had my own unique experience as a student of his in the late '80s, and he's so memorable and so kind. And my father's in Africa, and he's from Eritrea, he's the economist there, and he told me to say, on behalf of our whole family, to say, blessings to you all. He knew him very early on, around the time of Obicheri and all these other teachers that are, everybody knows Posnansky. He's the most sincere person. And like you said, Tessa, when he says, well, if I'm going to some remote place somewhere in Africa, do this, do that, wear this, he is that guy, and he knew exactly where I was from. He says, no, you could be Eritrean, or you could be, from Ethiopia or Abyssinia, however you want to call it. And you go on and give you the vintage answer, the other answer, and no braggadocious, nothing, just a man. I learned so much about Africa from him. I was born in Sweden, and I learned so much, and he filled in gaps, of information. He's such a pleasant human being, and he's such a family man. And his wife, I never met her, but she's Ugandan, beautiful. I love those people there next door to my country my parents are from. I just love this man so much, and I know everybody does here, you can feel it. And I'm just so thankful to just be here. Mamie Louise brought me, and she's a very close friend of Tessa's, their family. And, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me being here, but I have to thank her so much for me getting here. Thank you. It's just such a great man who lives on. Anybody else want this, Michael?
Yes. Uncle Terrence, if you could help there.
Thank you.
Here, we'll bring it to you.
Oh, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Marla Burns. I was the director of the Fowler Museum at UCLA, and I was a lucky graduate student also at UCLA, and Merrick was on my MA and PhD committees. And I did the bold thing as I always call myself a baby graduate student, is joining into one of his field schools at Hanny. And this was probably 1978 or 1979. And there we were, and some of us had never been to the continent before, and others had been on archaeological digs with Merrick previously. But for those of us who hadn't been there, and Tony was were you on that trip that I was on? No, okay. And And we were there, and for all I've listened to this afternoon about how nurturing and caring and loving Merrick was, and of course I agree that indeed he was that kind of a man, he kind of just dropped us off. Like here you guys are, 15 of you, figure it out. There was no, this guy's in charge, this person's doing that. It was this, I thought, what? You know, I don't know what I'm doing out here. And what kind of car was he driving that he drove for all those years?
Renault.
A Renault. Yeah, he had a little white, I think it was a white Renault. And my job, because I was the art historian in the group and I was going to be doing my own research in Nigeria, he took me in the Renault. He said, pack a bag, and I'm going to give you this case, which he had put together with all sorts of tools and notebooks. And basically, this is what you need to do, a little ethnography, even though I had never done any ethnography before in my own experience. And then he drove me to the town of Bonakiri. He introduced me to one of the young men who spoke English, and he just drove off and left me there for 2 weeks. And I thought, okay, here we are. And it was the case that this village, every single woman, whether grandmother, mother, or child, made pottery. It was an extraordinary situation, and I was going to be doing a study of what they were doing, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to have to make it up as I go along. And I was a little annoyed because I thought, it'd be good to have a little more training or something. But I have to say, now that I think about that experience, and I think about how Merrick handled it, I'm no longer angry, because I think what he did is he allowed me to figure it out myself and to know that one can do that kind of work just by trusting in your own instincts and trusting that someone like Merrick, with all of his years of experience, trusted us to be able to do that job. And we stayed friends for all these many decades, and I have to say, I really think that what he gave me is a gift I didn't know was coming, but certainly really affected my life and my career and me as a person, because he was such a wonderful friend, and the family. So I just wanted to add that kind of paradox of Merrick.
Thank you. Were there any others? Well, please. Oh, I think we'll take the one more in the back. Yes.
Oh, and we were on the trip together. Did you feel the way I did?
Yeah, my name is Phil DeBarros. I don't have a lot to say, as I already wrote a remembrance for the Institute for this occasion. The trip in Ghana in 1979 was an extremely valuable experience for me, not because I hadn't been to Africa before, because I'd been there 8 years as a Peace Corps volunteer and administrator, but the experience with Merrick working in the field deeply impressed me, and I followed through with many of the things that he did to the extent I could during my own dissertation work on ironworking in Bassar in Togo, where I had also been a volunteer. One thing that just struck me about his kindness and thoughtfulness was when we had a celebration of my 50th birthday, he called me from Japan to say happy birthday. I'll never forget that, because I certainly didn't expect it. I knew he had been off into Japan. And so I'll leave it at that. It's just something I fondly remember. I could go on for hours. I so admired the man, a very extraordinary individual. Thank you.
Thank you. As we close up here, we wanted to to also bring in another portion of his culture. So I'd like to ask Stephanie to come up to help perform the Mourner's Kaddish.
We're going to do two things.
We are? We are?
Yeah. There's a wonderful poem by Maya Angelou, and Chris is going to read that.
It's called When Great Trees Fall. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder, lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their sense eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly, our eyes briefly, see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave us. Our souls, dependent upon their nature, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces filled with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed, they existed. We can be and be better, for they existed.
The Mourner's Kaddish is the traditional prayer for when somebody dies. Anybody who knows it, please join with me in this. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, b'alma divra chirutei, b'amlik malchutei, b'chayachon uv'yimichon, uv'chay d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kari v'yimiru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yit hadar v'yit halel v'yit halal shmeid kudshah b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechimata ta'amiran b'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba men shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'imrumav. Huya say shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel. And we say, Amen. Amen. Uncle Merrick did this for my mother when she died.
Thank you all. In just a few moments here, we'll go and we'll enjoy some lovely food, I should think, for a high tea, which is very fitting for who my grandfather was. If there was one meal that he wouldn't miss in the day, it was tea time. I vividly recall we all kind of got COVID right around the same time. And as such, it was at a time where he couldn't be inside of the nursing home, and so he stayed here with us after he got out of hospital. He wouldn't always eat breakfast or lunch or dinner with all of us, but like clockwork, he would always sit in a rocking chair, which is over in the corner. He would sit there with the fire on, and he would make sure that he had his tea. Tea was very special to him, and it was one of those things that he kept going, and he always found a way for people to be connected into it. I, for many years, did not drink tea. I, of course, was uncultured at the time, but as an 8-year-old, tea was just something that I did not enjoy. And so, to help make sure that I could still be a part of the group, he would always go to Trader Joe's and he would make sure that inside of the fridge, it may not have been the newest bottle, but he would always put a cold bottle of Virgil's root beer for me to enjoy, so I could still sit with everybody and enjoy tea in our own way. And that's just who he was as a person. And so I hope that today we all have some sort of closure, and we know that grief is one of those things that doesn't just end at the celebration of life or a funeral. But we hope that it's something that throughout our conversations today, with conversations that we have in the future about him, that you find closure in your own time. I'll end with a quote from something that I know my grandfather never watched because he was never much of a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But there's a quote from WandaVision at the end, which says something to the effect of, "What is grief if not love repeating?" And so I hope that that love repeats with all of us for many, many years to come. Thank you all for being here today, and please enjoy some tea, some libations, and please be well. Ashe.
One last order of business. Today would not have been possible without the help from our friend Amina. She did these brochures. She took a lot of orders from Tessa.
A lot of directions, changes and tweaks. And did you see that comma? That's not comma. That's a semicolon.
But she has been the consummate supporter of us and helped us through this. There are others who have supported us spiritually, but we could not be here with these beautiful programs without her help. We also have our videographer, Spencer, who has been recording this for us. He gave us the directions on how to get everything onto the YouTube, so you will be able to watch it there. Yeah, or BlueTube, as my mother-in-law says. So enjoy the afternoon, share stories, and please stay in touch.
Thank you for coming.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a bunch of these chairs and we're going to move them around the tables, and everybody can then enjoy. Okay? So bear with us as we get this done. All right? Thank you.